Hi, my name is Trish. I have been telling myself that I'm going to do this for a really long time, and now I'm saying there's no time like the present. I post on TikTok, so why can't I make this video? Let's start at the very beginning. 2 years ago, I started a journey to find myself. It started really small with yoga. I would do yoga every morning, and journaling and saying no. I was in a very unhealthy relationship. I was married for 2 years. We had just had our son. I was freshly postpartum, and I thought, holy crap, I'm a mom. Like, I'm a whole ass mom. I have to start acting like it. I want to be different than my parents, and I have to start now. Like, I waited too long. And so I started by doing yoga and showing up for myself every single day. Sometimes I would miss a day and I would get really sad, but then I would show back up and I would do it again. And I would keep using that time to pour into myself. And then I started journaling, and I would try to go every single day. No excuses. And then I would miss, and then I'd start again. And through that, I realized that I was in an unhealthy relationship. It was very toxic. It was very abusive. And the more that I tried to set boundaries and expectations, the worse it would become. And let's put some timestamps on this so I can keep track. So that was in October of 2023. I had my son. I'd started doing that. And let's say through the first October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July. 10 months of that, of setting boundaries and learning how to show up for myself and advocate for myself and learn myself. It became really hard for my relationship to work. And in July of 2024, my ex-husband ended it. We were on a trip with his family at his family's house in Iowa, and I was anxious. I struggle with really bad anxiety, like crippling anxiety sometimes. And I was freshly postpartum, and it was really hard. And I told him I wanted to come home, that I was having a hard time, and I needed to bring my son home and be in a place where I felt safe. And because of that, he ended our marriage. And that night, I drove 2 hours with my son back home, and I found myself thinking, holy shit, can I do this alone? Like, am I gonna be okay? What am I gonna friggin' do? And he came home the next day and tried to fix it. And I said, no, you know what? I think you're right. I think that this is done. I think that for the sake of our child, we need to start being serious about being healthy. And that was the start of the end of our marriage. From July until November, we cohabitated. And there were ups and downs. We tried to see other people. We tried to make it work. We'd come back, we'd fall apart, we'd manipulate, we'd fight. It was awful. And in October, our son turned 1 and I turned 25. And I woke up and my frontal lobe had fully developed, and I thought, what are you doing? What in the world are you doing right now? You are not in a safe environment. You are not teaching your son healthy mechanisms for being an adult. This is exactly what you were trying to avoid. And at the time, I was teaching at a nonprofit here in town, and I told them what was going on, and they mentioned our local women's shelter for women and children who were in my situation of domestic abuse. And it took me a little bit of courage to build up to use that as an option. I called a few times and I asked how it worked. I asked if I could set up like an appointment, and it's not how it works. And on November 14th, I had a company party. And on November 15th, I packed up everything that I had. I took it to work that day. And afterwards, they took me to the Y. They dropped me off. They took me to get my son from daycare, and they dropped me off at the Y Center. Not even a week later, they let me go, which is a whole nother story. Anyways, so I'm at the Y, and this is November, and I feel like my whole world is falling apart. It was really, really hard. I did not tell him where I was going. I told him I was staying with a friend and that we just were not cohabitating well, and it was just in the best interest that I just get out. And while I was there, I kept my head down. Oh God, I like blocked it out, but I kept my head down. I took my check from my first check, my first full check from my job after they let me go, and I used it on a down payment for a house at the beginning of December. And at the beginning of December, I made it out of the Y, and I had my own place, and I felt like I had found some stability. And I was wrong. I was so wrong. I hadn't learned. And I searched for love outside of myself, and I ended up trying to go back to my ex while simultaneously talking to another gentleman who was very similar to him. And during this time, from like December to January, I told myself, you're learning who you are. You're learning what a relationship is. You're learning, be patient. And I fully committed to a relationship with another gentleman, and I had let go of the relationship with my ex-husband. I told him we could co-parent, it would be fine, and everything was fine. And I started seeing this other gentleman. And it started out fine with the love bombing and the we can do this and we'll figure it out. And by, January, February, March, we had a joint bank account, and we were talking about moving in together and buying a car together, and we did with my taxes. I paid for the down payment on a brand new car, and I paid for the back payment of my rent, and I got a job, and I thought I had found stability. And so from March and then April and May, it started to get worse. I would set boundaries. I would show up for myself, and I would say, hey, these things aren't working. These things, we're not doing the things that we said we were. I need us to commit to this. I feel like I'm committing, and I feel like you're not. And it was me. It was my fault. I wasn't doing, I was too much. I was feeding into his insecurities. I was making him more insecure, whatever it may be. And so I tried to change. And come May, he stopped helping. He completely shut down. He never held up his promises. And I was in a position where my utilities were getting shut off. I was on the verge of eviction, and I had nothing, and I was terrified. And he left. He ended up saying that it was too much for him. He couldn't handle it. And he went back to stay with his parents and left me with shut off notices and an eviction and no car. He took the car that I had paid for because it was in his name, and he refused to pay me back, and I was in a rough spot. And so I did the only thing I knew how to do, and I reached out to my ex-husband, and he told me he couldn't help me. But at the time, his sister had kind of heard what was going on, and she said, okay, no, this is unacceptable. Men aren't shit. Come stay with me. Let me be your friend and provide you a place of stability. And so I listened, and I trusted, and I moved in, and it took less time this time for me to stand up for myself and say, hey, I don't think this is a good relationship. I don't think that this is working. I don't think that we are behaving in a way that is healthy. And by July, I was asked to leave because our relationship had turned unhealthy and I had stood up for myself. And so in July of this year, I moved in with my grandma because I felt like I had no other option and I was ashamed to go back to the Y. And so I moved in with my grandma, and from July until October, I poured into myself. I gave up on relationships. I set standards. I told myself if they cannot meet these requirements, then I do not want to be with them. And I started running. At the time, I had already kind of been running, but I fully committed to using it as an outlet. I tried to stop smoking weed because I was very, very addicted to it. And I know what people say, you can't be addicted to it. And that's like saying you can't be addicted to fucking cough medicine. Anything that alters your brain chemistry, you can be addicted to. And I was using it as a way to suppress everything. I didn't want to feel the feelings that were going on around me. I didn't want to take ownership of the positions that I was putting myself in. And so I smoked. But then I tried to stop. And living with my grandma, it was hard. It was really, really hard. A lot of generational trauma and a lot of seeking love from what I thought was family, and setting boundaries, which was not easy. But I learned so much about myself. And I became really, really fond of posting on TikTok. Every single thought that popped in my head, every single struggle, everything. Like it was my video diaries, I think is what I have. And they were helpful. And also I started writing. I wrote poetry and feelings and things that I couldn't quite articulate to other people because I didn't feel understood. And I used those outlets instead of smoking, and I used yoga and running and music and dancing, and I became a really, really, really good mom. And then in October, well, really the end of September, my grandma got sick. I took her to her doctor's appointment, and she had a mass on her lung, and it didn't look good. And she deteriorated really, really quickly. And she didn't want to fight. It wasn't what she wanted. She talked about being ready and wanting to go home, and I knew. And I thought, okay, like this is my thing. I need to be here for her. So I put everything that we went through aside, and I was there for her. But my family had other motives. And they would take her to the hospital, and they cut me out. Said that I wasn't as helpful as I needed to be, and I wasn't doing the right things. And at the beginning of October, while she was hospitalized, they kicked me out. They gave me a 48-hour notice, and they told me that they were going to shut off the utilities in the house, and that I needed to be out, and that my uncle was going to move in. And I had my son at the time, and I freaked out, and I did the only thing that I knew how to do. And I called my ex-husband. And I explained what was happening. And he came right away, and he helped me get out in the 24 hours that I had, and he took our son so that our son was in a safe place. And I learned that they were not cutting the utilities, so I stayed there to get the rest of my stuff together. And then I got a U-Haul, and I moved all of my stuff out. and I put it in storage, and now, well, we're not there yet. And I put it in storage, and I tried to figure out what I was going to do. And he offered help. At first, he offered to let me stay with him at his mom's, and I couldn't bring myself to do that. And so he offered to get me a hotel when I told him that I was just going to be homeless. I was like, you have our son. It'll give me a week to figure things out. Because at the time we were doing 1 week on, 1 week off of custody. And I was like, I'll figure it out. I don't want help. You know, you've done enough. I appreciate it. I just want to figure this out on my own. But then he got me a hotel room. And then I had sex with him. Because, you know, if you're watching this, then you get it. And he thought that that was an invitation to open our relationship. And I told him no. And he said, okay, whatever, let me help you. This hotel was just for the night. Come stay with me at my mom's until you can figure it out. And I said, okay. And so I stayed with him for a couple of days while his mom was at a work trip out of state. And the pressure began. The pressure to be what he wanted and not who I was. The pressure to show up in ways that I didn't want to. And when he received pushback, I no longer had a place to stay. And for 4 days, some amount of days, I was homeless. I didn't tell him where I was. I had him drop me off at my dad's apartment complex. And from there, I walked a couple miles to our old house that we had bought when we were married, that he had abandoned. And I stayed here where I'm at now. I stayed there for a few days with no electricity, no running water. And I went back to my mom and I tried to figure my shit out. I showed up at the library every day so that I could, have an outlet that had electricity, that had a bathroom, that had community, that had things that I loved, like books and puzzles and knowledge, and internet, so that I could continue to post on my TikTok. As it became closer to having my time with my son, I bucked up and I said, okay, bitch, you cannot have him in an abandoned house with no electricity and no running water. What are you going to do? And so I called the Y shelter, and they had space, and they took me in. And that was Sunday, October 12th. I made it there. I got intaked. They took me in. And that afternoon, I called him and said, okay, I'm ready to have my son. I'm in a stable environment. And he asked me where I had been, what I had been doing, what I was up to. And I didn't tell him. Said it doesn't matter. He was in a safe place. What I was doing, it just wasn't relevant. I'm at the Y shelter now. You can bring him to me. I'm in a safe and stable environment and ready to have time with my son. And he refused to give him to me. He said that it was not a safe environment, it was not stable, and that my history had proved me to be unstable for our child. And I cried. I cried and I cried and I cried. And I thought, holy shit, I am the worst mom in the world. And after 2 days of planning on how to kidnap him from daycare, I relented and said, okay, no, you're not. You're actually a really good mom because your son is in a safe place. He has food, he has water, and he has his father. And it was hard. It was really, really hard. And so I started seeing the therapist at the Y, and I was opening up about everything and coming to accept my situation. And while I was there, I really poured into myself. I continued to run. I continued to do yoga. I continued to journal and write. And I started drawing and finding more creative outlets for myself. And I continued to post on my TikTok and really just show up for myself. And slowly his dad let me start seeing him and coming to his residence and having time with him and putting him down for bed and having just some really much needed time with him. And it was working and it was fine. And while I was at the Y, I did amazing. I worked the program. I showed up for myself. I showed up for those around me. I did really, really well. So well that they basically thought of me as an employee there and not a resident. And I made friends and I found a community and a running group. And I thought that I had finally found stability. And at the beginning of this month, actually, the middle of this month, because we are in the middle of the month, and about a week ago, as I am preparing for what's next in my life, I am abruptly exited from the YWCA program. I had committed a crime. I broke some of the rules. I had a candle, and we were not allowed to have them for safety reasons. And it was discovered, and they had to make me leave. They gave me the weekend to figure it out, and they found it on a Friday. They gave me until Monday the 15th to figure out what was going to happen. To not be homeless. And on Monday the 15th, I freaked out. I had a full meltdown, but I also was able to stay grounded within myself. And I called and I got some energy assistance so that I was able to turn on the utilities in our old house. I found reliable transportation to get me here. And I moved out of the Y on Monday. I was able to technically land on my feet in a place that was safe, that was warm, and that was semi-comfortable. I mean, other than the traumatic experiences here. And for the past 4 days, I have been avoiding the biggest elephant in the room that I think I've ever imagined. And that is how much I have grown. It is how much I have changed. It is how much I have learned about myself, how much I have loved myself. And tonight, as I was doing yoga and releasing some of the tension that I felt this week, I have come to the realization that I have broken so many patterns. I have made so many strides towards what I always thought I was capable of. And I have become so incredibly proud of myself and so incredibly strong and determined that for the very first time in 3 years, I'm not scared of what's gonna happen. I'm not worried that things aren't gonna work out. I'm not stressing over what I can't control. I have found a faith and a stability within my own self and my own heart that has shaped me for the rest of my life. And I just wanted to share that with the internet, because if there's one thing I love to do, it's cry in front of people. So this is for anybody who feels like 2025 was the shittiest year of their life. It was. It absolutely was. But that just means that we are starting this shit out. Well, I guess finishing this shit out at the rockiest of rock bottoms. And that means that there's only one place left to go. And that is up.